Hi there, let's deal with topic 3 in our textbook, chapter 1, and that's the pros and cons between asexual and sexual reproduction in organisms. Asexual reproduction produces offspring from a single individual, and there are several different ways that this might happen, and so let's look at some of the different ways. Very basic organisms may split in two, producing two identical individuals. For example, we call this binary fission. Most microorganisms produce by splitting in two without exchanging any genetic information. So here under the microscope you can see two cells. They're pinching their cell walls in, or their cell membranes, sorry, and that's what this arrow is pointing at, and you'll create two different cells right there. The important thing to note about this is those two cells are identical. Moving up to a little more advanced organisms, budding is another form of asexual reproduction where a parent produces a small bud, which is a smaller copy of itself. Examples, small pond organisms called hydra. There's a little baby hydra, and it will pinch off, float away in the water, and it will be a copy of the mama hydra. Coral reefs carry out the process of budding. Every little extension on the coral reef is a new individual, but these new individuals are identical to their parents. Spores are another good example that can produce asexual reproduction. They're kind of like seeds, except in the case of seeds of plants, seeds are not identical. Spores are. So fungi might produce asexually through spores, and again the new individual would be identical. Plants are the master of asexual reproduction. By that I mean they have many ways or examples of how they might create a copy of themselves. When plants carry out asexual reproduction, it has a special name called vegetative reproduction, and it does not involve the formation of a seed. Only one plant is involved, and it usually produces a spore. The new individual is always genetically identical. One example is cuttings, where a leaf or a piece of stem is torn off from a plant and we can start a new plant. So this is an example of a cutting, and it used to be a stem and now it's growing roots down below here. These little strawberry plants are producing little babies that are connected. So there's a little baby plant connected to the big plant. There's another baby. Spider plants, and then these are strawberry plants. Strawberry plants, same idea as the spider plants. And so these are called runners. Spider and strawberry plants produce runners, a stem of a plant either above or below the ground, which makes new plants. There's bulbs and tubers. So potatoes are tubers, thickened underground stems, and we can separate this and we can plant it and produce a whole new plant. Onions are bulbs, and we can chop off the onion bulb and create a whole new plant. Shoots or suckers, like in the aspen tree. So the underground aspen tree will pop up new plants. So here are the adult versions, and they're usually connected underground by suckers or shoots. Mold is pretty unique. If you can kind of zoom in on this picture, because mold actually has two ways to produce. It can produce asexually through spores. However, it also has a means of producing sexually, kind of like plants. So before I get into the different ways we might know how sexual reproduction occurs, let's talk about the differences in pros and cons. Asexual is one individual, and it's a quick way to populate the species because you don't have to find a mate. However, the downfall is biodiversity goes down. There is no variation, therefore very little biodiversity, which could hurt the organism when it comes to the environment changing. Let's say you're a plant and you produce copies of yourself asexually, and they all have the same size roots, the same leaves, etc. Then all of a sudden a drought hits and your roots are all too short. Every single individual in your family has short roots. No diversity. There's a great chance or probability that everybody will be wiped out of your species if you're all the same. Which is why lots of organisms carry out sexual reproduction, because there's greater diversity or variation. The downfall is this takes time. It takes time to find a mate. So here it is again, sexual reproduction. You get advantages, diversity. Offspring are less likely to have mutations. Disadvantage, it requires a mate, and population increases are limited because you can't make as many individuals. Asexual reproduction, like budding and spores and binary fission. Advantage, you can increase your population very rapidly and doesn't require a mate, which takes less time. Bad things about it, lack of diversity, and because they reproduce offspring that are genetically the same, there could be mutations. So let's talk about sexual reproduction. Organisms that carry out sexual reproduction have to produce a special kind of cell called a gamete. And a gamete is a reproductive cell. So it's either sperm or egg. And what happens is these gametes have half the number of chromosomes in them. So in the case of humans, a normal human cell has 46 chromosomes. The gamete would have half as many. So that when two gametes unite through fertilization, you create a whole new set of 46 again. So here are some examples. Bacteria and some single-celled animals called protozoa carry out sexual reproduction. See this bridge here? What happens is they transfer and exchange genetic information. This is called conjugation. These paramecium are doing the same thing, and when they bud off or let go, they're genetically different. In human sexual reproduction, we've talked about already sperm and egg. When they unite, that's called fertilization, and it creates a zygote. So these are gametes. When gametes fuse, the fertilized egg is now called a zygote. And a zygote has the full complement of chromosomes in DNA. This has half, this has half. Let's look at sexual reproduction in plants. Plants actually have male and female parts to them. And what happens is, let's take the male parts. The stamen is the male part of the flower. Okay, and so that's this whole thing. That's the stamen that I just circled. And it's made up of the top part, which is the anther. And on top of the anther is the sperm, or we call it pollen. These are the male gametes. And then the stalk is called the filament. The female part is called the pistil, circled here. And so here is the pistil that I'm circling. And the pistil is made up of the ovary down below where my pen is, the ovules, and the egg, which is inside the ovules. Pollination is sexual reproduction for a plant. So when the pollen unites with the egg, with an egg in a plant, that's called pollination. And that's fertilization. And what is the result? a seed, and then a fruit. Let's look at the brain pop clip on asexual reproduction just as another review.
Can you reach the milk? Thanks. Dear Tim and Moby, can you tell the difference between a male amoeba and a female amoeba? From Jerry. No, it's not a riddle, Moby. Amoebas don't have males and females. They reproduce asexually, meaning without sex. Okay, have your laugh. Asexual reproduction is pretty common among plants and simple animals. In some plants, like the strawberry, a stem extends away from the parent plant, with child plants growing all along it. Aspen and poplar trees do the same thing with their roots, shooting them out in all directions to grow new trees. A single grove of trees like these might all come from one parent. Farmers have asexually reproduced plants for thousands of years by taking cuttings from one and replanting them. However asexual reproduction is done, the children plants are always genetically identical to the parent plant. So they're actually clones. Clones share the same genetic information, but parents and their sexually reproduced offspring do not. In sexual reproduction, a female egg cell is fertilized by a male sperm cell. Each cell contains a half set of the parent's chromosomes, or genes. When the two cells combine, the genes do too, making a unique new individual. But in asexual reproduction, the parent's genes simply split in two. In eukaryotes, organisms with nuclei in their cells, the chromosomes replicate through mitosis. That's the process of cell division that goes on all the time in your body. In most prokaryotes, organisms without nuclei, the chromosomes replicate through a similar process called binary fission. Bacteria are prokaryotes that reproduce this way. Some animals can reproduce asexually by a neat little process called budding. In budding, a child organism develops as a growth on the parent's body. In some animals, like the yeast here, the bud falls off and becomes an independent creature. In other animals, like corals, the buds stay put, just one more clone rooted to the entire colony. And you've probably heard about how a starfish that gets its arm cut off will grow back a new one. That's a process called regeneration, which in certain cases is a form of asexual reproduction. Like, if an injury is severe enough, the animal can regenerate into two or more separate children. Yeah, I don't think that sponge will regenerate. Well, it's made of plastic.